Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Today I'm here with Paul and Sam to talk about their experiences in Select Committee for the Maori Wards Amendment Bill. So, hello, gentlemen.
Morning.
Kia ora.
Afternoon. Depends when people are watching this.
Yeah. So we'll start with you, Sam. You did the in-person route. How did you find some of the experiences?
It felt weird walking into a select committee room with a chair, talking to a camera, and the only other people in the room were select committee's parliamentary staffers. And I turned up there at it was about 3:10 or 3:15. I turned up about an hour early because I was running a little bit ahead of schedule, and I found a place in Wellington, not far from the Beehive, where I could park for 2 hours for free. So I had some leeway. So I went in to watch the submissions, hoping that there was actually going to be other submitters in person going to be there that can sit there and talk in the background and that sort of thing. But no, there wasn't. It was just me and effectively James and three other parliamentary staffers in the room the whole time. It was quite an interesting experience being stuck with. Yeah, it felt like you're literally in an empty studio.
Yeah. And then for you, Paul, you did the Zoom version. So how was that?
It was kind of weird. They spent a day trying to organize it. So they messaged me the night before the Wednesday submissions going, so do you want to do this tomorrow? And I'm like, tomorrow's just not enough time. Please give me Thursday. It wasn't until sort of 5:00 on Wednesday night that they sent through all the details and, here's the link and that kind of stuff. And the explanation that, you'll be in the room, so don't have the video playing in the background because you'll be able to watch through the Zoom stream and there'll be echo and stuff like that. Which is like, yeah, that makes sense. And then you sort of go into this waiting room where all you see is the main camera feed. So you don't even know who it is that's going to be on the committee because they split the committee up into two to get through all the submissions. So it's not until you actually get pulled in front of the committee itself that you see who the MPs are that were sitting there. It was really fascinating for that one. And I'm sort of sitting there going, holy crap, Lady Turia Moxon is coming up after me and she's in the room and she's watching what I have to say. And she is this absolute legend when it comes to things like Te Tiriti and the law and holy crap. So hope I don't shit myself.
So were you quite nervous then?
Yeah, I was. I've done a million presentations and, I'm on camera all the time. But for me, it was about making sure I got the message across because when I do my own stuff, I can sit here and I can do a million takes if I need to, but you can't do that when you're doing a presentation like this. And for me, it's such an important bill that's so ill thought out, that's hurting so many people in so many different ways. It was important to have a say. So yeah, there was definitely butterflies.
Yeah. I'll ask you both this question, but I'll go with you, Paul, this time. So, what was your inspiration for your submission for those who may not know at the moment?
So for the written part of the submission, I wanted to do a general overview of all the points that were wrong with what was going on. But because I'd watched the submissions for the sort of 2.5 days beforehand, I knew the questions that kept coming through, and there were so many people who were really passionate and directly impacted by this law change, who were much more eloquent and much more able to bring a perspective that was really personal that I couldn't do. I thought I'd try and answer a question that I saw keep popping up, and it mostly came from the right-leaning MPs that were on the committee, and that was around how do you know this is going to fail? How do you know this is going to be detrimental? James used the line, I'm Maori and I got elected in the middle of the South Island and I won a general ward, so why wouldn't that happen here? So I decided that the way that I'd approach it was to explain how the way that mis and disinformation works in these campaigns in particular, especially ones built around race, can be really detrimental to those people involved, but also to society as a whole. I thought it's something a bit different. It answers their questions. It gives it a bit of an academic spin, and it focuses on areas that I know a bit about. So that's sort of how I tied it all together. But I was up to like 12:30 the night before going through my speech. I rewrote it like 4 or 5 times before I finalized it.
And for you, Sam?
Well, as someone who is so used to doing things live and not doing things pre-recorded, it was kind of very normal to come up with the words on the spot. So that was something a bit different in there. So I didn't turn up there with a pre-prepared speech. I basically had an idea of what I wanted to say and basically pulled it off. I mean, I had my submission there on my phone to keep his notes, which were mentioning the key points. But yeah, no, effectively there was no planning in my speech. It was very off the cuff and on the spot. I mean, and you would see that from many of the It's in the Ballot and the Order Paper shows that I've done. You can probably tell how tuned in and how I can sit there and ping things off based on what's been happening. So to me, that felt normal. Now, I probably, as being an in-person submitter, I probably understood how to do the camera stuff a lot different compared to the average person, considering when I did do my submission, because it was just James and myself in the room, I was talking to the camera when I was doing my submissions and when I was doing my questions from the rest of the committee except for James. So that was so on my particular part there was a lot less of it. And one thing that James mentioned during my submission was I was one of only 3 submitters that mentioned anything to do with the postal voting voting period extension. So what she said was quite intriguing, that there was only 3 people in total. And it's a shame that particular part went in a live stream recording blip or something went wrong there. Because that footage that was recorded missed 2 of the 3 questions that I was asked, and I want to rewatch that sort of thing there. So I don't know what they're going to do to fix it, because that particular day when they were having the select committee meeting, they were having issues with the stream, and I think it's because Parliament is not used to having to split their committees down there. In the past, the one bill that they did have to do a big split was euthanasia, and this was pre-COVID. But typically, from a post-COVID period, I don't think they have been lambasted with so many requests for oral submissions that they previously have. But I think they might need to, as a technical aspect, basically work on the basis of the fact that you're going to be splitting the committee in half frequently, especially when people are flooding in with submissions. I mean, and with the fact that we can remotely connect in, it's a lot, it's a lot more different now compared to how things used to be. And the fact that, the MPs can actually do their job from their electorate for select committees rather than being forced to come down to Wellington to do their job. So on that particular aspect, we've got better opportunity for select committees, as well as having, more people participating.
Yep, and one thing I will add to that, Sam, just as a bit of a correction, they do actually do the environment committees split very often, so they are used to splitting them, because I was.
Was this this term, or was this often in the past as well?
No, as long as I've been watching, and I've been watching over a year.
Okay. No, that's interesting. Yeah, no, I think the split committee approach is a good thing, and I actually would like to see Parliament actually have a standing order that works on a split committee process, considering we've got 6 parties in there, is to have the ability for all those 6 positions is to have someone from each party in that process. Considering the proportionality of select committees based on the makeup of Parliament, but when you're down to 6 people, it's a little bit different on the way how to do things. And I mean, the split committee process is mainly for submissions. It's not, do they normally make law-making decisions and amendments to bills that split in subcommittees? I think they tend to usually leave that to the whole.
Yeah. So you two had 2 different people to deal with. You had MP James and you had Jamie. How did they compare?
I think it's really hard to compare them because obviously different styles to how they do things, but also I think different perspectives, because you get somebody like Jamie who is still a sitting councillor as well in a local body authority, and I don't think James has had experience in that field. So they have very different sort of backgrounds to bring to the table. But at the same time, I found with Jamie, one of the things that irritated me the most about Jamie was sitting here listening to him talk about Maori. and Murray, and just not getting the names right and struggling to do a lot of the pronunciation with a lot of the sort of kaupapa based groups that were there.
James was very good with his te reo.
Yeah.
It felt very different to what was potentially being expected. He really respected te reo, the whole process. He was actively using it. I as an aspect of from coming from a submitter part, it felt like he's in the party that should, he's in the wrong party on what was happening on the day. But I don't know what his personal views are. And the other thing is, he'll probably be whipped into voting a particular way, as most legislation is. He definitely did show quite a fair bit of interest in local government, and he asked forward-thinking questions. Considering my two people, I got asked questions, and the two people asked questions was Todd Stevenson, who every time I've seen him ask questions, they've been brilliant questions. They're about probing factual information. They're not playing into a myth or a stereotype. I've always found his action as his questions were always about how to improve the quality of the submission. From other members, from what I've seen online, I don't really think that was necessarily always the case, and some of them would try to get leading questions that would try to make it to seem like you're following their perspective to steer an answer that they wanted to hear, rather than letting the answer come naturally off or what a person's real opinion is.
Yeah, and there were 3 points that I sort of noticed during the submissions, and not only yours, that I was talking to you guys about in the lead up to this interview. One was that Jamie would not call them your worship, but for the mayors, but James would. And I didn't like that. I thought that was very disrespectful, considering that one of the people he had to deal with was his current boss, I believe.
That was amazing.
Boss, you're working at your other job.
Yeah, that was amazing. I love sitting there as she goes. So we had very little time to get feedback. So we've done basically an informal, what do you want us to say to the councillors? Councillor Jamie Arbuckle has told us that he has a conflict of interest, so will not offer feedback, while Jamie is chairing the meeting that she's in, going, don't say a thing, don't say a thing. But there is honestly a clear conflict of interest. Like, anybody can see it because he holds those two positions, which does raise the question, why did he not recuse himself from this particular process? And I realize that the aim here is for them to sit down and listen to submissions, but he still has a chance to influence how people respond to questions and stuff like that as the chair of that subcommittee. So I think he probably should have recused himself, but yeah, not going to.
I do notice that was it the Greens typically, as well as Te Pāti Māori, subbed out their normal Justice Select Committee members for someone different. Like I only saw on one of the days I saw Te Kura Ferris in there, and I have not seen Timothy Paul in any of them, but we have seen Celia Wade Brown, and so that was something I do from what I've seen there. And I think also Labour had Willie Jackson in there, which Willie Jackson isn't a Justice Select Committee member. The just the ones, I think, for Labour is Duncan Webb, Ginny Anderson, and I can't remember who the third one is.
Yeah, but I suspect Willie just wanted a chance to yell at people. Because he was bouncing around between committees, and he'd sort of go to a committee which had like the TPU presenting, for example, the Taxpayers Union and union in quotes there, and he ripped into them. And then he'd go to another one that had, Democracy Northland, for example, and he'd rip into them. And there was very much I'm going to go to the ones that are specifically run by organizations that are using this as race baiting, and let them have a piece of my mind. I say full credit to him for that.
Can you do that? Well, he's proven you can.
Yeah.
Willie Jackson was the star of the submissions for me. He was the star of the committee for me.
Yeah. Well, beforehand,
Yeah.
I actually asked the clerks, who's going to be on the committee, and they said, look, we can't tell you because it changes, like everybody's moving around. So the only thing that'll be consistent really is the chair. So it doesn't surprise me that they can move around.
Another point that I'll make that I found annoying through the submissions was MC Brewer. He drove out the wall. Cameron Brewer. He drove the wall.
Now, there's a very interesting part there. My grandma had some friends in Kapiti Village, former colleagues from her days as being school teacher, school principal, and she friends with Pat and Phil Shepherd. And Pat and Phil know Cameron Brewer very well. And it was quite interesting when he got elected, Grandma was asking me, so what seat's he standing in? Oh, yeah, Pat and Phil know him quite well. He's saying exactly the things they used to sit there and tell him to shut up about back in the day when they were very strong in the National Party.
And you have to remember, Cameron Brewer is the one who got himself in trouble on election night for saying, well, this is a victory for pale, stale, and male. And, it's just...
That's what the comment Grandma was mentioning about.
And the thing I loved about when Cameron got his Let's Take a Muffins was when he, early in the day, he ran off Tori Whānau and then she turned off.
So we need to have a highlight of the different submissions clips to go through here as well.
That was hilarious.
Well, the taxpayer union is going through them all for us on our behalf, apparently, so they can get a theme of what those submissions were, which is, I thought, fascinating. Actually, the taxpayer union submission was one that I found really interesting because, it's obviously all spun bullshit because it's a taxpayer union, but they did make a point to go, we do regular polling with Curia, and we're in the middle of a polling process at the moment, and we always ask questions around issues that have cropped up at the time, and we're asking questions about the removal of Maori ward bills. We recommend that you take very close attention to what those results are. It's like, well, if you're in the middle of getting those results, how do you know what they are? That doesn't sound like open and honest polling.
Isn't David Farrer, the pollster, also on the board of the Taxpayers Union?
The final highlight. The final highlight for me was Don Brash.
Uncle Don, the uncle you don't want around the table. Unless he's got a bowl of kiwi fruit.
Yeah.
That was so cringe. That was so cringe. So my final question then would be, how would you improve a select committee if you were to do it again? Now, me and Paul have a couple coming up later in the year that we'll have to do, maybe one or two. How would you improve it again if you were to do it again?
I don't know if there's much improvement I can make on my one.
What about yourself then, Paul?
I'd slow down how fast I talked and make more eye contact. I did the whole, talk to the camera thing, but it's very much... you kind of need to do something to surprise them or shock them to make them pay attention at this. Near the end of the third day of a very long, for them it must feel like very long days, very short process. But they're obviously drifting off. They've heard everything a million times before. I think it needs, for me, if I was in that same situation, it would be something to make them sit up and go, oh crap, I need to pay attention. Maybe
I got that moment when I started on that, because it just said what it's in the ballot about and who our audience base is, and I think that really piped up quite a few of them because it's suddenly all the I couldn't see the couldn't see the Zoom feed, but I gathered that they may have all. I did see James prick up when I started saying things that this is a tool that helps those who work part-time, work hours that can't meet traditional candidates, those who can't get out to go there, those who are immunocompromised, those who are disabled. It was just, but his eyes propped up quite a fair bit from that. So, he was saying, well, this is a tool that can help. So it's definitely, you've got to have some of that and I think I may have been that example, is what you've just said, Paul, that was like quite out of whack with the rest of the submissions around that period. And I think the other one was I think at the end was the good part mentioning about the voting period and the fact that he immediately was able to respond to that. So obviously, I think it just proves that he's definitely at least reading stuff and keeping track of information of what's been happening, or he's getting a decent summary that makes it appear that way.
And Paul, you talked about at the beginning of this interview how when you did yours, you got a lot of eye rolling and people bolted.
It was one of the things I found most fascinating, actually, like watching the submissions the couple of days beforehand. There are a lot of people who are really passionate about this, who feel that this is a bill that attacks based on race. And that passion comes through in the submissions, and you hear a lot of people talking about, yeah, this is a racist bill. But every time they did that, you would see an eye roll from one of the right-wing politicians. And that frustrates me. It doesn't feel respectful to listening to what people's opinions are. Because I can turn around and say, I think this is racist, but I'm a middle-aged white dude, I'm not the one who's living those experiences. And this is coming from people who are directly impacted by what that bill says. I think it was Rima Knuckle, one of the Auckland National Party MPs. And she got quite snarky with one person because she goes, I get tired of people saying this is racist. What makes you think it's racist? It's like, well, you don't actually get to decide that. The people who are impacted decide whether or not something is racist. And they're telling you that it is. Yeah, it's frustrating.
And I know Todd Stevenson did sit there and say about, can voters not cope with too many complex things if the fact you're saying that local body elections is going to be taken over with about 4 against Maori wards. And I said, well, I elaborated to what happened with our It's in Bell experience with 2022, where the focus was COVID vaccinations. And there was a big focus particularly in Wellington, was around candidates' COVID vaccination status and why. And I don't necessarily think that was necessarily helpful, because if you're getting that at time and time and time again at Meet the Candidates, and you were having merged Meet the Candidates, that was the only information that was probably getting out. That wasn't getting out where someone stands, why they stand for something, or why did they, you might find out, why someone chose not to get vaccinated, or why not. That sort of thing there. It's just, when that was the sole focus. And I remember people saying, why wasn't this information in the candidates booklet? But that's not the right place to put that information. But why should that have been a carve out for 2022? I mean, if we're going to ask it, should we sit there and ask everyone what their polio vaccine status is? You know what I mean? And most people probably necessarily wouldn't know, because now we have that as a kid. It's not like you have that as an adult.
Actually, most people aren't vaccinated for polio anymore because it's mostly been eradicated. It's the same as smallpox.
Paul, do you think that part of your issue was that you were already a public figure, and that's why a couple of them didn't like you?
Have I made enough enemies in Parliament? I honestly don't know. It's kind of a strange one, because most of the MPs that were on my committee, I haven't done anything about specifically. Jamie, I have. In fact, I even mentioned Jamie in my written submission. But the others, I don't think I'd mention them at all, except Ryan, because he ran in an electorate that had more conspiracy theorists than anybody else. So his name sort of popped up quite a bit there. And, he was the one that made a few headlines last year when he showed up to a group of sovereign citizens and said, hey, I'm one of you guys. So I understand where that reaction came from. But for everybody else, I couldn't tell you. I suspect that might be part of it, but I suspect it was also, with near the end of the third day, we've heard an awful lot of stuff. It's hot, it's stuffy. I've been staring at a computer screen for hours. I just need my brain to switch off for a minute.
But is that something you worry about as a public figure, that they won't take you seriously? Because you've got getting a bigger and bigger profile every day.
I don't expect the right-wing MPs or any sort of right-wing politician to take me seriously anyway. I don't say things that they like or agree with, and that might be publicly, like they might not publicly agree with it, but I understand that would color their opinion of what I do. At the same time, I don't see why I need to sit here and pander to any politician. That's not my job. I mean, I don't get paid for doing what I'm doing anyway. So it's one of those things that if they don't like it, that's on them. My biggest concern about public profile is actually around safety. If you say the wrong thing about the wrong person, that's when you get some very angry people come out and threaten some very horrible stuff.
Yeah. I'll let you finish your point, Dan.
Okay, I'm actually glad that the subcommittee I was on, none of them had been on It's on the Ballot before or had issues with. So I think because all the MPs on there, none of them had been on It's on the Ballot, and none of them had, like, literally, they weren't like Ginny Anderson or Barbara Edmonds or Theresa Ngobi, who had to send us reminders that they were not coming, or Francis Hughes, who was a national candidate standing against Barbara Edmonds, who publicly lashed out at us on Facebook in a blank Facebook profile with her name. So it was good that they probably didn't know much about it. They may or may have not heard, but they came with a very open, that they didn't have their mind clouded with a negativity judgment behind that. So they came with a more open mind and actually, walked out of there as a more positive outcome from it. I mean, I rang up Nick not long after and I had to describe Todd Stevenson. He goes, oh, okay. And I'm trying to feel like, Todd Stevenson. You remember candidate Michael Harnett, who was standing in Palmerston North Ward, Palmerston North electorate for in the election. He goes, yes, he was the ACT candidate. He has so much in common with the Green candidate. I said, that was the type of approach I felt Todd Stevenson was. And he goes, oh, so interesting. Because, I mean, Nick was on there as the camera person for all the It's in the Ballot shows. He knows how far we went and everything. And he said it was quite intriguing, having to describe that. He goes, okay, that's a very interesting perspective to describe, but that was the best way I could describe him to Nick, because he hadn't watched the meetings or anything. He's kind of been, focusing on other things, such as candidate liaison at the moment.
See, I think it raises a really interesting point actually around how we see candidates in the media. We see MPs in the media. We know what party they're aligned with. So we form opinions about what their ideologies are or how they're going to behave. Somebody like Todd had a pretty big snafu not that long ago with Steve Brunias when Steve wrote that article about how he hadn't read any New Zealand authors, couldn't name any. He was the spokesperson for the arts and didn't really understand the area. And it creates this sense of somebody who's not really good at what they're doing. But when you sit down and see him in those committees and you see him listening and taking notes and asking really good questions, it reminds you that our politicians are still people, that there is no such thing as a binary position for them to take. They've got the capacity, like everybody else does, to learn things, to understand things, and to take a different perspective on things. So I think it's really important for people to realize that about them. Sure, he might be sitting in a party that I don't agree with a lot of their policies, but that doesn't mean he's a bad person. There's a big difference there.
The thing I find interesting about Todd, and we'll finish here, is that he doesn't seem like your typical ACT MP to me. He doesn't seem like your average. He seems a bit more, if you want to be truthful, he seems a little bit more on occasion, and I've watched him in the House several times. There are times where he seems more left-wing than right-wing.
Just to mention, Todd's partner is called Alex and is a man, but that's all I found out about him on Wikipedia. If that can give an idea of which particular, in a private life capacity, where things lie, and that can probably experience and influence his behaviour in a more public light, that might slightly veer off from where the party naturally sits. And also in profession, that may have also shaped his role, considering he is pharmaceuticals, I think, is his background, which means if he's gay and that sort of thing, the stuff in pharmaceuticals he may have been pushing for would be HIV prevention, medicines, treatment options, how to improve the life in that, because he is part of that community. Whereas you may not have that from someone who, sleeps with women, doesn't sleep with men, has a wife, kids, and is not exposed to that environment, or has had to think along that risk level approach.
Yeah.
It's interesting if you look at ACT. It's actually, I think, the party that has the most. God, I can't believe I'm saying this about ACT, has the most diversity in the type of MPs that they've got. You get somebody like David Seymour, who is very different to Brooke Van Velden. You get somebody like Todd Stevenson, who is very different to Mark Cameron. There's a lot there that fits under the umbrella of the ACT party. I know
Probably
during
the
the
most
election.
diverse.
What was that?
Most diverse party in the coalition.
Which is really ironic. I was getting messages before the election from within the campaign about how the aim for the party was to get as many candidates as possible, because they were starting to poll relatively well. They wanted to make sure everything was sorted out, which meant that they didn't go through as much of a vetting process as they would normally. I don't know if you guys have seen the news this morning that there was a whole bunch of inner turmoil within the party during the election campaign, and they had a lot of people up and walk away from it. But the problems
there
that
was
sort of popped
also
up,
how they decided who the candidates were on the list from 30 to 55 was simply based on alphabetical order.
Yes.
And that and I had that confirmed from Sean Rush.
Yeah, they lost 8 or 9 candidates in the lead up to the election because they didn't vet them properly. But I think that shows that, while they might have a relatively diverse caucus at the moment with very different perspectives, they were sort of in a rush to make sure that they had names more than they had the right experience mix there.
And those diversities might get weeded out by possibly an election or two down the track.
So yeah,
which is not what we want to see.
Anyway, thanks, gentlemen, for joining me here. It was great to hear your experiences about the Maori Wards legislation.
Thank you for having us.